Hello everyone, this is yet another Dune Raider devlog. Over the past few weeks, I have been working on a lot of back-end changes, most of which pertained to world generation and the height map. I started off rather simple with fixing the interpolation between sampling points on the height map. Some of you may have noticed that there are visible squares or triangles in the terrain, and that has nothing to do with the height map resolution. In fact, there are 20 times as many triangles as there appear to be on the terrain. It was just that a lot of those triangles formed flat surfaces because I have been using linear interpolation between height map points for a very long time. And it was about time I fixed this. So I got to work making a quick and easy smoothing algorithm that, instead of linear interpolation, it will interpolate between tangent planes on height map points. This makes the terrain much smoother and allows me to reduce the resolution of the height map so that chunks require less height map calculations to generate. Now, after that was done, I had another big issue that was bound to come up eventually. Presently, the Oasis, the last region I have made, is only halfway through the game, or what I have planned to be the game's regions, but it is also 20 kilometers from the origin. That's 20,000 units in Unity. And it is at this point that floating point precision becomes an issue. And this is only halfway through the game's regions, and I have plans to make these regions larger later on. So I had to fix this by implementing world shifting, which is where whenever the player gets so many kilometers out from the origin, it will move everything back to the origin seamlessly, so that in terms of the game engine, you are never more than like a few miles out from the origin. And ideally, this is not at all visible to the player. This of course required me to rewrite all of my height map functions and world gen to no longer use Unity's coordinate system. I created a special structure for double precision vectors that I now use in all of my world gen. Now, unfortunately, implementing world shifting did undo all of the performance gains that I got from the interpolation algorithm. One of the biggest handicaps on the game has always been the chunk generation speed, because in a game where you can sail very quickly across the dunes don't exist fast enough for you to do that. Chunk loading has stopped being able to keep up with the player after they reach 80 meters per second, which is very, very slow in regions like the Windy Expanse. So, I need a chunk loading method that is significantly faster. Currently, chunk generation first creates a height map and then samples hundreds of thousands of points on that height map to create a mesh, which is then passed to the GPU. This is a lot of data to process and then pass to the GPU before it can render. So instead, I decided to pass in a simple low-resolution flat plane mesh alongside the height map itself. And then the GPU will use the vertex shader to adjust the vertices on the plane to match the height map, and then we'll use a tessellation shader to create the interpolated points. This does create a lot of work for the GPU, but it removes that overhead from the CPU end of things, as most of the mesh work on the CPU side has to be done on the main thread and cannot really be multi-threaded. This also has the benefit of implementing level of detail for the mesh without having to generate multiple meshes on the CPU. And the frame rate is mostly unaffected. The game runs at 50 frames per second now, and it can keep up with the player going up to about 200 meters per second, which is considerably faster. So with the new tessellated chunks done, and the need to generate chunk meshes completely eradicated, I move on to features that will be needed in the coming regions. To start, I made a system that allows objects to be visible outside of render distance and before they are even loaded in. These skybox objects are billboard textures that spawn in to represent distant unloaded objects. They currently spawn in for every merchant, town, and harpy nest, and have noticeable smoke clouds above them. These billboard objects will scale according to distance to give the illusion of being further than they actually are in the game space. And these objects fade away from view as you approach them, as the objects they represent actually load in. This should make it much easier to find things like merchants and harpy nests, so that you don't spend hours scouring around for a boss that is very large and visible. This does, however, kind of make the trade map an obsolete item now, and I will have to figure out how to rework it or replace it to make it useful outside of the canyon region. In addition to that, I have added all of the stunts to spawn pools, so they will now spawn in the boneyards of every region. And even better, I have also made more variety for stone materials. And the color of stones and rocks now depend on the region that they spawn into, so that I no longer have 10 copies of the same rock in the game files. And should also make the world look more interesting and varied. And last but not least, I have fixed the saving and loading system to properly save and load the player's inventory. while also making it function with the new world shifting system. But that is all for this devlog. The coming up is a much needed item rework. I will be implementing alternate weapons into the game, as well as making models for the new region. So until then, see y'all later.